Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. It's been quite a bit since my last video, but honestly the content that came out with the last update just really wasn't that exciting and in my opinion worth covering. If you want a quick review of what was missed, for Apocalypse, he's just too expensive as a native tier 2 character for his lack of performance in both PvE and PvP. He needs penetration added to his kit, and he needs heal added to his iframe ignore so that when he spams it, he can actually compete with some of the top metas by being able to stay alive. The other tier 4 from last month was X23, and because she was switched from a combat typing to a speed typing, she doesn't really have much value in PvE, and even for the speed typing that she has now, her PvE performance isn't good at all. She has a very low number of hits. On the other hand, she is actually quite decent in Alliance Conquest specifically, not PvP overall, because she doesn't have the iframe ignore effect on her skills, so she is kind of capped in terms of her performance. But if you have her artifact, she is quite decent in Alliance Conquest. But again, I'm not sure that's worth it for a lot of people, since that's pretty much the only value that she has, sometimes in Otherworld Battle if the bans and buffs align properly. This month should be a lot more interesting. We already have a new game mode. Doctor Strange is finally good, and that is actually what the purpose of this video is, as well as covering some tips and tricks for the new zombie game mode, covering some characters that are good for that mode, and things that might help you score higher so that you can get more tokens and in turn more tier 4 materials or other items that you want from that shop. I believe that Null is also data mined for this month, so that should be a pretty massive upgrade with the tier 4 and uniform, as well as an artifact. He can potentially be a PvP meta, having that immortality effect, and could also make a pretty big splash in PvE too, in things like the universal villain for ABL, but it really depends on if they do him properly. There's also the seasonal uniforms, which usually give a pretty big upgrade to a character, at least the tier 4 character, or provide us with some pretty powerful supports too. Anyways, for this video, I'm going to be covering Doctor Strange's performance specifically in PvE. I had him at level 80 before, so you'll get to see how much of an improvement the tier 4 makes, as well as how much of a difference the new uniform makes compared to the old one. Keep in mind that I already have a mighty CTP of Rage on the character, so all my testing is done with that. Then nearer to the end of the video, I actually equip a brilliant CTP of Rage on him, so you can see the level of improvement that makes on this character specifically. If you want to use the character for PvE, which is what I would recommend him for, the most ideal option is a CTP of Rage, because there are so many skills that you have to spam through. Using a single skill damage proc won't nearly be as effective as having that CTP of Rage. I would even argue that having a custom gear that has that mini rage effect could potentially be better than having a CTP of Energy or a CTP of Destruction. Because I already had the character fully geared up from the last uniform, I couldn't really test him how I usually do, so I only really tested him in the Dark Phoenix World Boss Legend, or the Jean Grey one. And you can see that I started off with the old uniform first and on stage 49 without any supports, just to see how he did. And he wasn't able to complete this fight. Time ran out with about 12 health bars left. With this new uniform, I still wasn't able to complete this fight, but I was able to shave off another 5 health bars before time ran out. I also noticed that with this uniform, it was easier to stay alive because the character has a V-pad on the 4th skill, which is the one that you finish on, so you can kind of move around and dodge some of the World Boss Legend attacks that would normally kill you. Whereas with the old uniform, you would basically just be stuck in the animation and end up dying. If you decide to tier 4 the character, you'll notice that he doesn't really gain a pretty big stat bump with his tier 4. Usually native tier 2 characters get a pretty good upgrade there, but it's only his energy attack that increases by roughly around 15,000, at least for my account. The HP barely increases by around 8,000, and the other stats are pretty trivial upgrades as well, with the exception of the instinct stat. But aside from that, he does gain another attack that deals damage, his tier 4 skill, as well as gaining the hits from the striker skill on top of that, which makes him quite good for things like ABX and ABL, where the number of hits actually matter. In terms of Doctor Strange's strikers for PvE, the very top option is Ghost Rider because of his ridiculous damage increase that he has on that skill. Other ones that also have a damage increase, but not nearly as much, are Iron Man, Black Widow, and even Wong with his new uniform. In terms of his skill rotations, they're kind of easy, but also a little bit complicated as well. There's basically 3 sub-rotations that you want to use. The ones that I went with, or the one that I tested, was to do a 5 delay cancel after the animation appears. Then you do a 2 cancel, 1 cancel, 3 cancel, 4. From there, you won't have access to your 5th skill. It'll still be on cooldown while your other skills are off cooldown and your CTP proc is available again. So from there, you do the same thing without the 5th skill. So you do 2 cancel, 1 cancel, 3 cancel, 4. And then when the CTP proc or whatever proc you have is down to 2 seconds, your ultimate should be filled up, and that's when you want to activate it because it has a kind of slow animation before it actually does damage. So when you have about 2 seconds left on your damage proc, possibly even 1 second, you want to go into your ultimate skill, and then you go back into the same rotations that I mentioned. Either doing a 5 delay cancel, 2 cancel, 1 cancel, 3 cancel, 4, or the same thing without the 5th skill. If you have access to your tier 4 skill, you basically want to use it right before going into one of these rotations so that you can fill it back up while also gaining the hits on it for that rotation and the damage proc that activates. You can see that with the tier 4 upgrade, I was actually able to complete this fight now and did so with around 40 seconds left, meaning that I did 7 additional health bars in the same amount of time. By adding in 2 supports, I was able to push 10 stages higher and was able to complete the fight with about the same amount of time left over. These aren't even the best supports that I can add for villain characters. There are better ones, but I decided to use these since I now have access to 2 additional villain supports, with Falcon providing a buff to zombie tagged characters and Wong going from a hero to villain, same with the other 2 characters, to be able to support magic characters who are also villains. For the final World Boss Legend test, I did the same fight, this time with a brilliant CTP of Rage, because I wanted to see how much of an improvement it made, as well as to boost up my scores in ABX and ABL. With the brilliant CTP of Rage upgrade from a mighty CTP of Rage, I was able to complete the same fight about a minute faster than before. Because of his crazy number of hits, Doctor Strange is now meta in Alliance Battle modes. Word on the street is that he isn't necessarily the top meta for ABX specifically. It seems that Magneto might still hold that title, but in ABL it seems that Doctor Strange does surpass Magneto. So one of the benefits of the latest uniform for Doctor Strange is that if you don't have the seasonal uniform for Magneto, then Doctor Strange is a really good second, very close second for ABX. Potentially can also overcome Magneto for certain accounts in ABX, but should be an upgrade in ABL. Aside from that, one of the issues with the latest uniform is that he doesn't have all of the cancel effects for the different seasons. In ABX, this is kind of a bigger issue because you have to use a specific striker to get that cancel effect, whereas in ABL, it's not that much of an issue because you can use another character to get that cancel effect and then swap back right away, which you can't do in ABX, and it might affect your scores there a little bit more than ABL. Regardless, he is a top character. For me, I was able to score around 16 million with a mighty CTP of Rage, and then was able to score pretty much 17 million with the brilliant CTP of Rage, but for this specific test, I only ended up going to 16.3 when I recorded for the first time. The character is definitely meta in Alliance Battle Legend. That's where he holds more value. With a mighty CTP of Rage, I was able to score around 11.7 million. If I played him better, I'm pretty sure I would have been able to score 12 million, but to make it easier, I used that brilliant CTP of Rage and was able to score around 12.2 million just with the first try. Again, if I played him better, I'm pretty sure I could have pushed to 12.5 million or possibly more. But again, I'm not an Alliance Battle player. A lot of people get way higher scores than me, but this is just kind of give you a breakdown of how I guess most players would be able to score if they had similar stats as I do. Besides ABX, ABL, and World Boss Legend, Doctor Strange is now also a top option for the new zombie game mode, specifically if you use him on the stages where Captain America is the villain that spawns in. The reasons that he is good for this mode is because he has a high number of hits, which allows you to take out a lot of zombies to increase your score, as well as deal a high number of hits when the actual boss spawns in. Besides that, he has a high amount of CC effects, so you can lock down the zombies and have them from messing up your run and either killing you or the other damage dealer that you have. And on top of that, his ultimate removes all buffs. So depending on the season and the buffs that are applied to the villains, he is able to strip them away when he uses his ultimate skill. In terms of what other characters are meta or good for this mode to push to high stages, what I've found is that you want to use characters that have a high number of percentage damage increases throughout their kit. So this could be either through having a very high damage ultimate that has that 100% damage increase or whatever it is. It can be other characters that have that damage increase on a singular skill, like their 4th or 5th skill or 3rd skill or something like that. It can be characters that have a lot of element damage that also increases very highly. You can also have characters that have a damage increase on their tier 4 skill or final damage from that. The other thing to keep in mind is damage increases that you get from passives, artifacts, and from type advantage, being able to choose the specific boss that you fight and the characters that you bring in to fight those. So it can be either using universal characters on any of the stages, or like I'm using here, using blast characters versus the combat villain, which is Captain America for this stage. For high stages of the zombie mode, it's essential that you have at least 3 support characters that are your backup characters, because you're mostly just going to be using either 2 damage dealing characters or potentially even 4 support characters, with one of the supports being in your active damage dealing role and having one primary damage dealer that is pretty much going to be carrying the stage for the most part. So with that said, the meta characters or tier list for this game mode does vary drastically from week to week, depending on what modifiers are applied to the game mode, as well as what skills are actually banned. But some of the top options I found are Ghost Rider, with his 4th skill having that massive damage increase versus villains, as well as him dealing element damage, which you can boost further. There's characters like Iron Man that I'm using here. He has that 200% damage increase to opponents that are under 30% health, which includes not only the boss, but also the smaller zombies too. He also has a damage increase from his artifact. And obviously Doctor Strange as well. Despite the fact that he doesn't have a high number of damage increases throughout his kit, he does deal a high number of hits and also has the ability to remove all buffs, allowing him to deal more damage while those huge number of hits come in, and he has the opponents locked down. Other characters that can be at the top depending on certain weeks are Beta Ray Bill. He provides support to alien types, he has element damage, and also has a damage increase on his 5th skill. You have Gladiator, who has a high number of hits as well as a damage increase on his 4th skill. You have Hela, who has a massive damage increase on her ultimate skill and also provides a support, but it doesn't really affect the game mode because they're all villain types. You have Jean Grey, who can just spam a lot of skills and does element damage. You have Dr. Octopus, who has 100% damage increase on his 4th skill, and if he has access to multiple skills and tier 4, you can reset his skills and constantly use them. You have Luna, who has a high number of hits. Her tier 4 also provides her with a damage increase, so that's also really good. You have potentially Hulk. He has a 100% damage increase on his 4th skill, as well as final damage on his tier 4 skill. Thor is a really good option if you pair him with things like Beta Ray Bill. He does element damage. His tier 4 increases buffs, so you can increase your CTP as well as your element damage and other buffs throughout his kit. And his tier 3 skill actually does a good amount of damage too. Characters like Psylocke, her 4th skill does a lot of damage. She does element damage. You have Miles Morales, whose passive gives him 120% increased damage versus villains. He also does 100% damage increase with his 4th skill. And you also have Gwenpool, who has a high number of hits and has an ultimate that deals a lot of damage too. I haven't really tested this, but I think that Loki could potentially be a good option as well, because there are so many zombies. It means that when you have access to the 5th skill, you can pretty much deal the maximum amount of damage from that skill every time. And characters like Black Bolt could potentially be decent since he also has final damage, but his other skills don't really do as much as his ultimate with that final damage active, so you need to have the tier 3 and the tier 4 active for that to be good in that particular season. Both characters are also universal, so that means that you can use them pretty much for any stage without any penalty. In terms of the top tips that I can give to boost your score in this game mode, the first one is to toggle off show battle info at the bottom of the screen, right under the autoplay ++ for me. because there is just so many different numbers that pop up on screen all the time that it's difficult to see when the boss spawns, and also might slow down your device and make you end up dealing less damage. The second tip I can give is for you to go to either the very top of the map or the very bottom as soon as the fight starts. You can do that by going to the top, casting an attack from one character, and then switching to the other character while they're protected from all the hits that are on the field, so the zombies are locked down. Then you can move the other character to the top, and then just keep attacking at the very top while they're all grouped up. That's basically what you want to do, is keep them grouped up at all times. One other thing is that you probably don't want to use characters that move around too much on autoplay to spread around the zombies and mess that up. The other two things I've noticed is that the bosses in this are pretty much equivalent to World Boss Legends, so they have all the immunities that they have. You can't really cheese the boss with all defense down, stacking up very high to be able to deal a high amount of damage. They are pretty much immune to that, but the smaller zombies might not be. The other thing I've noticed is that the character that you're not controlling will pretty much use their ultimate whenever they have access to it, but you can actually control when this happens by pressing the little gear or cog in the top right. You'll have the menu pop up, and then you have a toggle option to basically turn off the tier 3 skill automatically being used when it's full. So ideally, when you get to around the 1 minute mark, you can pretty much toggle this off, and that'll prevent your other character, if you're using 2 damage dealers, from activating their ultimate skill, so that when you reach the 42-second mark, roughly, that's when the boss spawns, you can press the settings thing again, toggle it on, and then you can activate 2 ults at the same time with the main character that you're dealing damage and stack that up to beat the boss faster. When the boss spawns in at that timestamp, you basically want to have as many skills available to you, including your tier 3 and tier 4 if you have access to that in that particular week, and potentially have your proc ready as well. One thing I do is to use a skill on the other damage dealer that I have to kind of lock down the opponents, so that the main damage dealer that I have can kind of move around and avoid being hit, and have all the skills ready to be able to cast when the boss spawns. 3 other things I've noticed is that for the most part, it doesn't really matter whether you have a tier 3 or an awakened character as your damage dealer when they're at tier 4, because you're pretty much only going to get 2 activations of your ultimate or awakened skill regardless. The other thing is that leaderships don't seem to work here. I can't really tell if they do or not, but I believe that they don't. And if you're using a support character as your backup and they're also awakened, make sure to use them in the first backup spot, so that if your main or your second damage dealer dies, then that support character that is also awakened will come in and immediately go into their awakened skill, as opposed to using a support character that is a tier 3, for example. They won't really do anything, but the awakened character might actually end up saving your run by going into that awakening skill. You saw from the last clip that I was able to complete stage 73 with Doctor Strange and Iron Man. That's the highest that I've been able to complete that I've tried. I also tried stage 73 with Thor, which I wasn't able to do, but I was able to do stage 70 with him last season. I actually used his old uniform because the 4th skill has a higher number of hits, not only as a damage dealer but as a striker, and because he doesn't move around as much with the old uniform as he does with the new one. So hopefully these tips help you get to a higher leaderboard score for your particular season or week, so that you can get more tier 4 materials and potentially some of the other bonuses too. As you saw from the video, Doctor Strange's latest uniform is actually worth it this time around, as opposed to his old uniform, which is also kind of ironic because his old uniform was called the Death of Doctor Strange, and he isn't good till he got this zombie uniform that was basically him being reanimated. So if you want a good PvE unit and one that could potentially replace a seasonal uniform for AVX and AVL, then Doctor Strange is definitely one to look at. For the next video, I'll likely be showcasing the test footage I got for Captain America, Falcon, and Wong with their latest uniforms, to give you an idea of potentially how to build them and how to maybe team them up in things like Alliance Conquest. If you enjoyed this video, found it entertaining or useful, please consider liking, subscribing, and potentially sharing this video with other people. It could help them out, and it definitely helps my channel grow too. As always, I appreciate people taking the time to watch these, So thank you, but the video is now over.